Today, I'm telling you a story so quiet and painful it lingers like a wound, whispered across the open plains of the Old West. A land where loneliness stretches farther than the horizon, and love is rarer than mercy. It all began with something almost invisible, a woman realizing she had never once been truly loved. That realization would carry her across danger, captivity, and toward a choice that would redefine who she was forever. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The warped floorboards of the Blackridge cabin creaked beneath Veska Rowe's bare feet as she swept the same patch of wood for the third time that morning. Outside, the Kansas wind shook the loose shutters, a restless sound she had known all her 23 years. The broom's bristles were worn nearly smooth, much like everything else in the house. Frayed, exhausted, barely clinging to usefulness. "Veska!" Her father's voice thundered from the front room, thick with the sour edge of last night's whiskey. "Get in here." She leaned the broom against the wall with habitual care and tugged her patched calico dress straight before stepping forward. Orrin Blackridge slumped low in his chair, an empty bottle by his boot and a scatter of cards spread across the table. The air reeked of tobacco and stale liquor. "Yes, Pa," Veska said. "That Ironfield man stopping by this afternoon. He didn't look at her, just stared down at his hands, as if answers might crawl out of his palms. "Make yourself presentable." Veska's stomach tightened. "Not again. You said last time—" "I didn't say anything that matters now." His bloodshot eyes finally lifted to hers, sharp and cold. "He's willing to take you off my hands. Might even forgive part of what I owe him from last week's game." But Paxton Greyholt was supposed to—" "Greyholt found himself a prettier girl in Dodge City," Orrin snapped. "One whose pa ain't drowning in debt." He spat into a tin can, missing by inches. The brown stain joined many others on the floor. "You're getting long in the tooth. You don't get to be choosy." Veska's fingers curled into her skirts. Greyholt had courted her for 3 months, wildflowers, promises of a small place by the river. She had mended his shirts, darned his socks, let him kiss her cheek beneath the cottonwood tree. Then he vanished without a word, leaving only rumors and her father's bitter laughter. "How much do you owe Hask Ironfield?" Veska asked quietly. "Enough that he's interested in other kinds of payment." Orrin stood, swaying slightly. "You'll do as you're told. Your mother, God rest her, would have wanted you settled." The lie burned like acid. Veska remembered Lysa Fenner's final days. Fevered, calling for a doctor her husband refused to fetch after gambling away the money. Lisa had died, whispering apologies to her daughter. "She'd want me happy," Veska said, barely audible. The slap came before she saw it. The blow sent her stumbling into the wall. "Happy?" Orrin snarled. "You think happiness keeps food on the table? Keeps a roof overhead?" His breath was rotten with drink. "You're lucky Ironfield's willing to overlook how plain you are. Lord knows you've got nothing else to offer." Veska touched her burning cheek, but didn't cry. She learned long ago that tears only fed his rage. "Yes, Pa." "Good. Now clean yourself up. Pin your hair different. Try not to look like a scarecrow." She retreated to her narrow room, scarcely bigger than a closet. The cracked mirror reflected a face she had grown to despise. Sharp angles, pale skin that freckled too easily, hair the color of dried wheat that never held a curl. Her mother had once been beautiful, before poverty and Orrin Blackridge wore her down. Veska saw none of that beauty in herself. From the window she watched the Garrett wagon roll past. Mrs. Garrett sat beside her husband, their 3 children riding behind them toward town. A whole family, a loved one. Veska pressed her forehead to the cool glass and wondered what that felt like. By afternoon, She changed into her least mended dress and tried to tame her hair. When Hask Ironfield arrived, she served coffee with steady hands, while the men spoke of her as if she weren't standing there. "She's a good worker," Oren said. "Quiet, knows her place." Ironfield, 40, graying at the temples, hands shaped by hard labor, studied her the way a man studies livestock. "Bit scrawny. Can she bear children?" "Her ma birthed 5 before the fever took her. Veska's got the hips." She stood against the wall, invisible and exposed, while they weighed her worth. Ironfield's general store was failing. He needed unpaid labor. A wife would do. "I'll think on it," he said at last, tipping his hat without meeting her eyes. "Got other options to consider." After he left, Oren rounded on her. "You stood there like a fence post. Would it kill you to smile? Show a little charm?" "You told me to be quiet," Veska said carefully. "Quiet don't mean dead." He dropped back into his chair. "We'll see if he comes back. If not, there's always old Pete down at the saloon. He's been asking after you." Old Pete was 60 if he was a day. Yellow teeth, wandering hands. Veska's heart sank even lower. That night, she lay in her narrow bed, listening to her father's snores and the distant howl of coyotes, the sound carrying across the dark Kansas plain like a warning she couldn't yet name. She found herself drifting back to the stories her mother once told about love. How Lissa Fenner had met Oren Blackridge at a church social. How striking he had looked in his soldier's uniform, standing tall and sure of himself. How he had promised her everything. Before the war hollowed him out. Before whiskey tightened its grip. Before cards became the only thing he ever loved. Veska Rowe had watched other girls in town be courted the right way. She had seen Benjamin Taylor carry Anna Morrison's bundles and walk her home after Sunday service. She had watched John Spencer build an entire house for Mary Patterson before ever asking for her hand. Those girls had fathers who valued them. Fathers who would never trade them away to settle gambling debts. But Veska was different. She was currency. A burden to be handed over to whoever would take her. The next morning brought Paxson Greyholt back to town, this time with a bride on his arm. She was small and fair-haired, her laughter light as chimes, her dress untouched by patches or repairs. Veska watched from behind the church after services, saw the way Paxson helped his wife into the wagon, saw the way he looked at her, as though she carried the sun itself. He had looked at Veska once, just once, before measuring her worth and finding it lacking. "I don't know why you torture yourself," Sarah Lowen said gently, stepping up beside her. Sarah was the pastor's daughter, kind-hearted, well-meaning, and painfully unaware of how cruel the world could be. "There'll be other men," she added softly. "Other men like Hask Ironfield or Old Pete," Veska said, bitterness slipping through before she could stop it. Sarah flushed. "I'm sure God has a plan. God's plan seems to involve me being traded like a sack of flour." Veska turned away at once. "Forgive me. I shouldn't speak that way." But that night, Hask Ironfield returned. This time, he brought a cheap ring and a practiced proposition. Oren Blackridge, deeper in drink and deeper in debt, accepted on Veska's behalf without hesitation. "Congratulations, daughter," he slurred. "You're engaged." The wedding would be next month. Veska looked at Ironfield's weathered face, his calculating eyes, and felt nothing. No joy, no fear, just an empty stillness. "Thank you," she said, because there were no other words available. Ironfield nodded once. "You'll move your things into the store after the ceremony. Plenty of work to be done." After he left, Veska stood alone on the porch, staring up at the stars. Somewhere out there, perhaps, were women who married for love, Women whose fathers protected them instead of selling them. Women who were cherished. But not here. Not her. I have never known love, she whispered to the vast Kansas sky. The wind carried the words away, just like everything else in her life. The following weeks blurred into preparation. Veska stitched her wedding dress from flour sacks, bleaching the cloth as white as she could manage. The women of the town offered tight smiles and pitying glances. Everyone knew Orrin Blackridge's debts. Everyone understood why Hask Ironfield had suddenly decided he needed a wife. "You're fortunate," Morna Ashby told her while fitting the dress. "Many girls your age are already spinsters." "Ironfield's a decent man," Morna continued. "Works hard, doesn't drink much." Veska nodded, letting them believe it was a blessing. But at night, her dreams carried her far from Kansas, away from debt, away from loveless bargains, somewhere she might be more than a burden to be traded. A week before the wedding, she made her decision. She would go west. She had heard talk of wagon trains bound for California, for Oregon, anywhere but here. She could work, cook, clean, raise 10 children if she had to. Anything was better than becoming Ironfield's unpaid labor, bearing children for a man who looked at her the way men looked at livestock. She held no illusions about finding love. That dream had died long ago, buried beneath every rejection and every quiet judgment. But maybe she could find peace. Maybe she could find a place where being unloved did not define her worth. Under cover of darkness, she began to prepare. By morning, Veska Rowe would vanish into the vast American frontier, carrying nothing but her mother's Bible and the certainty that whatever lay ahead could not be worse than what she left behind. She was wrong about many things, but she was right about one. Her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. The wagon train stretched across the prairie like a dust-covered serpent. 23 wagons strong, heading west toward promises none of them could guarantee. Veska joined them in Independence, Missouri, offering her labor in exchange for passage. The wagon master, Draven Quill, studied her with hard, assessing eyes before jerking his chin toward the Stonehalt wagon. "They lost their eldest girl to fever last month," he said. "They could use help." "Could use help with the young ones," Draven Quill had told her. "You pull your weight, you can ride with us." That had been 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks of endless plains, choking dust, and a bone-deep weariness she had never known back in Kansas. But also 3 weeks of freedom. Freedom from Orrin Blackridge's house, from Hask Ironfield's measuring stare, from a future that had felt like a tightening noose. The Stonehalt family was made up of Kenrick Stonehalt and Althea Windrow, both in their 40s, and the remaining children, ages 6 through 14. They treated Veska Rowe kindly enough, though grief still lingered in Althea's eyes whenever she watched Veska working in the place, once held by her lost daughter. "You're doing just fine, dear," Althea would say, resting a hand on Veska's shoulder as she struggled with the cook fire or wrangled the younger children into obedience. But Veska heard the unspoken truth beneath it. "You are not her. You will never be her." Still, it was better than what she'd left behind. Here, her labor meant more than settling another man's debts. Evenings followed a familiar rhythm. Help prepare supper over shared fires, tend to the children, mend torn clothes. Then she would collapse onto her bedroll beneath the wagon, muscles aching, lungs full of dust. But this night felt different. The air carried more than heat. Conversations around the fires were tight with unease. "A scout spotted Apache sign 2 days back," Veska heard Draven Quill telling the men. "We're skirting the edge of their territory. Keep sharp." She had heard stories of Indian attacks. Everyone had. But out here, beneath a sky so wide it swallowed thought, those stories felt closer than they ever had in Kansas. Veska drew her thin blanket tighter and forced herself not to dwell on it. Around the largest fire, families gathered as they did most evenings. The Ashbys brought out a fiddle, and young couples danced despite their exhaustion. Veska sat apart, darning one of Rit Callow's shirts by firelight. She heard the women talking. "Marriage really is a blessing," Iris Dawnford said, her hand resting on her swollen belly. "Calder Brune tells me every day how grateful he is that I agreed to marry him." The other women laughed softly, trading stories, courtships, awkward proposals, wedding nights filled with tenderness. Veska's needle slowed. "What about you, Veska?" Nim Ravelin called from across the fire. "You must have had beau back in Kansas. Pretty girl like you." The lie came easily. "I was too busy helping my father." She forced a smile. "Never had time for courting." "Well, California's full of single men," Nim said with a wink. "You'll find someone." Veska nodded and returned to her sewing, though her hands trembled. These women spoke of love as if it were as natural as breathing. They had been chosen, cherished, wanted. Their husbands looked at them like prizes, not burdens. Later, when the camp finally settled into sleep, Veska lay awake beneath the wagon. The stars blazed brighter than she had ever seen, untouched by town lights or smoke. She found herself whispering to them, just as she had on her last night in Kansas. "I have never known love." The words came easier now, admitted to the dark. "No one has ever looked at me the way Calder looks at Iris. No one has ever been grateful that I existed." The prairie offered no answers, only the distant howl of coyotes and the soft breathing of the Stonehalt children. Veska closed her eyes and tried to imagine what it would feel like. To be loved, to see someone's face brighten at her presence, to be held as something precious instead of tolerated as something necessary. But imagination failed her. How could she picture something she had never experienced? It was like trying to imagine a color that did not exist. Morning brought trouble. One of the oxen had gone lame, forcing the train to slow. Tension spread through the wagons as they fell behind schedule. Every delay increased the risk of early winter snows in the mountains. Veska was helping Althea with the washing when the commotion broke out. Riders approaching from the east. Not Apache, but white men. Hard-looking types who unsettled even seasoned pioneers. "Bounty hunters," Kenrick Stonehalt muttered, checking his rifle. "Looking for runaway slaves, or anyone they can claim fits a description." The riders circled the camp, questioning people. Veska kept her head down, scrubbing clothes with focused intensity, but she felt eyes crawling over her skin. "That one," a gravel-rough voice said. "The blonde, she matches a description we got." Veska's heart stopped. Had Orrin Blackridge sent men after her, or Hask Ironfield? What description could they possibly be carrying? Draven Quill stepped forward, several men moving in beside him. "Runaway bride from Kansas," one of the riders said flatly. "They say her father's offering a reward for her return," the hunter went on. "Claims she stole from him before lighting out." Stole from him. Veska Rowe nearly laughed, as if she had ever owned anything worth stealing. "Don't know a thing about any runaway brides," Draven Quill replied calmly. "All our people are accounted for." The bounty hunter swung down from his horse and took a few steps closer. Veska caught the sour stink of whiskey and trail dust clinging to him. "Mind if I ask her myself?" "I do," Draven said flatly. Before the man could speak again, Althea Windrow stepped forward, placing herself beside Veska. "This is my cousin's daughter," she said. "She's been with us since independence." "You're mistaken." Other women moved in without a word, forming a tight wall. Even those who barely knew Veska closed ranks instinctively. The bounty hunter found himself facing a line of frontier women whose eyes promised trouble. After a moment, he shifted his weight and backed off. Maybe so, he muttered. But if we learn different— You won't, Drevin cut in. Now move along. We've got miles to cover. When the riders finally left, Veska's hands shook so badly she could barely grip the wet laundry. Althea rested a gentle hand on her shoulder. Whatever you're running from, dear, that's your business, but you're one of us now. She met Veska's gaze steadily. We protect our own. Veska blinked hard against the burn in her eyes. It wasn't love, not the kind she'd once dreamed of, but it was acceptance, safety, something she had never been given before. That night, she worked with new energy, helping prepare supper. When young Nera Foxwell asked her for a story, Veska surprised herself by agreeing. She told one of her mother's tales, a happy one, from before everything had gone wrong. The children listened wide-eyed. Even a few adults drifted closer. You tell that real nice, Brax Dunvale said afterward. Got a gift for it. A gift. Veska tucked the words away like something precious. Maybe she lacked beauty or money or a father's love, but maybe she had something after all. The attack came 3 days later. They had just finished the noon meal when the scouts came tearing back into camp, shouting warnings. Apache warriors moving fast straight toward us. The camp erupted into controlled chaos. Men seized rifles. Women rushed children into the wagon circle. Everyone moved with practiced urgency. Veska, get the children inside, Kenrick Stoneholt shouted, already taking up position with his rifle. She grabbed Nera and Rit Callow, pushing them toward the wagon. Elin Haraway and Vex Ridgeman helped lift the younger ones up. War cries split the air. Gunfire cracked. Dust swallowed everything. Veska had never been so frightened in her life, but she held the children close, whispering prayers and promises she wasn't sure she could keep. Outside, the fight raged. Shots firing, arrows hissing, men yelling orders and warnings. Then she heard Althea scream. Without thinking, Veska looked out. Althea had been caught in the open, scrambling for extra ammunition. An Apache warrior charged toward her, tomahawk raised. Stay here, Veska ordered the children. She didn't remember grabbing the cast-iron skillet. Didn't remember running. She only remembered the weight of it connecting with the warrior's skull, dropping him just feet from Althea. Get back to cover, someone shouted. Veska hauled Althea upright, half dragging her toward safety. An arrow flew past, so close she felt its wind brush her cheek. Another warrior burst from the dust. Veska raised the skillet again, ready, but he didn't attack. He stopped and stared at her. A young man, no older than she was, eyes sharp and unsettling, as if he could see straight through her. Then he turned and vanished into the chaos. The attack ended as abruptly as it began. The Apache withdrew, leaving fallen on both sides. The pioneers held, but not without cost. 3 men dead, several wounded, supplies lost and shattered. You saved my life, Althea sobbed, clutching Veska's hands. You could have stayed with the children, but you came for me. Anyone would have, Veska said quietly. No, Kenrick Stoneholt said, gripping her shoulder, his eyes damp. Not anyone. You're a brave woman, Veska Rowe, someone told her quietly. Braver than you know. That night, as the dead were laid to rest and the wounded were tended, Veska found herself standing at the center of something unfamiliar. People who had barely noticed her days before now met her eyes. Men tipped their hats. Women squeezed her hands in passing. She had proven herself in fire and blood. Shown a courage she had never known she carried. Yet when she lay beneath the wagon once more, her thoughts returned to the Apache warrior who had spared her life. The young one. The one who had looked at her as though he recognized something in her. She wondered if he too understood what it meant to walk through life alone. Unclaimed by love, unanchored. Maybe none of us truly knows love, she whispered to the stars. Maybe we're all just searching for it, white and Apache alike. The wind offered no reply, and for the first time in days, Veska slept. The prairie sky stood witness to her quiet revelation. She was still unloved, still alone in the ways that mattered most. But she was alive, she was free, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. For now. The second attack came at dawn, 10 days after the first. This time there was no warning. Veska woke to screams and the thunder of hooves. The camp exploded into chaos. Warriors everywhere, arrows striking flesh, families scattering in blind panic. She grabbed Nera Foxwell and Rit Callow, shoving them beneath the wagon. "Stay down!" she shouted over the din. Kenrick Stoneholt was already firing from behind a water barrel. Althea Windrow crouched beside him, reloading with shaking hands. But there were too many attackers, coming from every direction. The wagon train's defenses, strong against a single charge, crumpled beneath the coordinated assault. Veska saw Calder Brune fall, an arrow buried deep in his chest. Iris Dawnford, heavy with child, screamed as she ran toward him. A warrior seized her, dragging her toward a waiting horse. "The children!" Althea gasped, spotting Veska. "Get them out! Run for the ravine!" But there was nowhere left to run. Warriors closed in from all sides, cutting off every escape. Veska watched in horror as families were torn apart, wagons set ablaze, their carefully ordered world destroyed in minutes. A hand clamped onto her shoulder. She spun, raising the knife she now kept close, then froze. It was him. The same young warrior from before, the one who had spared her. His face was painted for war now, but his eyes held that same unsettling recognition. He spoke urgently, words sharp and unfamiliar, hands gesturing. When Veska didn't move, he pointed toward the Stoneholt children. Then to himself, making motions that seemed to promise safety. "No," Veska said firmly, stepping between him and the wagon. "No." An older warrior shouted something harsh. The young man answered back, motioning toward Veska. They argued, voices rising, even as the battle roared around them. At last, the younger warrior grabbed Veska's wrist. His grip was strong, but not cruel. She fought him with everything she had, knife, nails, desperation. But he was stronger, and her movements were slowed by exhaustion and heavy skirts. He dodged her wild strikes, speaking constantly, his voice almost pleading. Then Kenrick Stoneholt charged in, rifle raised. The young warrior moved faster than thought, knocking the weapon aside. The two men crashed together, grappling in the dust. Veska scrambled toward the fallen rifle. She never reached it. There was a sickening crack. Kenrick collapsed, his neck twisted at an impossible angle. "No!" Althea's scream tore through the air. She ran for her husband, but other warriors intercepted her. Everything after that blurred. The children crying, Althea clawing and screaming until a blow to her head silenced her, wagons stripped and burned with ruthless efficiency. The survivors, mostly women and children, were rounded up, hands bound. Veska found herself shoved among them, the smoke of destruction stinging her eyes as the world she had just begun to belong to disappeared in flames. They stumbled across the prairie, smoke curling behind them from the burning wagons. Everything the pioneers had dragged west, their supplies, their plans, their fragile dreams, had been reduced to drifting ash. Veska Rowe scanned the line again and again, panic clawing at her chest. She couldn't see the Stoneholt children. Fear pounded through her. For them, for all of them. Stories she'd heard about white captives crowded her mind, each more horrifying than the last. They walked for hours beneath the punishing sun. No water, no rest. Some women cried openly. Others, like Veska, moved in stunned silence. Her feet bled through her worn shoes, but she forced herself onward, knowing anyone who fell behind would be left to die. By dusk, they reached an Apache camp. Veska had expected something crude. Instead, the order of it unsettled her. Wickiups stood arranged with purpose. Horses were corralled efficiently. People moved with the practiced rhythm of a living community. The captives were separated. Veska tried to stay with the other women, but the young warrior from the battle, whom she heard others call Rak, gripped her arm and guided her away. She fought again, but thirst and exhaustion had drained her strength. He led her to a wickiup set, slightly apart. An elderly woman sat outside, weaving baskets, her movements calm and steady. The woman looked up as they approached, her lined face giving nothing away. Rak spoke at length in Apache. The old woman, clearly someone of standing, studied Veska closely, interrupting now and then with questions. At last she nodded and gestured for Veska to sit. "No," Veska said, though her legs trembled. "I want to go back to the others." The woman surprised her by answering in English. "You sit. You fall down anyway." Veska's knees buckled as if summoned by the words. She sank to the ground, dignity forgotten. The woman handed her a water gourd. After a brief hesitation, Veska drank deeply. "I am Arok," the woman said. "Rak's grandmother. He says you are brave, says you fought for the woman, protected the children." "Where are they?" Veska asked, her voice breaking. "The children. Are they safe?" "Other families take them," Arok replied, studying her with dark, assessing eyes. "Rak says you are different, says the spirits marked you." "I don't understand." "No," Arok said quietly. "You would not." She returned to her weaving. "You rest now. Tomorrow you work." Rak had vanished during the exchange. When he returned, he carried a bundle, setting it at Veska's feet. A blanket, food wrapped in cloth, soft strips of leather. "For your feet," Zia explained, pointing at Veska's ruined shoes. Veska stared at the items, confusion battling exhaustion. "Why?" Rak spoke briefly in Apache. Zia translated. "He says you have empty eyes, like his sister had before she died. Says you know sadness." That explained nothing, but Rak was already walking away. Arok shrugged. "Apache ways are not your ways. Eat, sleep. Tomorrow is tomorrow." With no choice left, Veska cleaned her feet with shaking hands. The food, dried meat mixed with corn, was unfamiliar, but hunger won. Every instinct urged her to stay alert, to plan escape, but her body betrayed her. Wrapped in the blanket, she slipped into exhausted sleep. She woke to noise and motion. The camp was already alive. People working, talking, moving as though white captives were nothing unusual. Perhaps they weren't. Zia appeared, holding out a new dress made of soft deerskin. "You work today. Your clothes no good here." Veska wanted to refuse, to cling to the last scrap of her former life. But practicality won. She changed behind the wickiup, the Apache garment strange against her skin. The work was hard but familiar. Hauling water, preparing food, the endless labor of keeping life going. Most of the Apache women ignored her. A few watched openly. Veska caught glimpses of other captives working elsewhere, but any attempt to approach them was firmly stopped. Rekha kept his distance through the day, though she felt his eyes on her more than once. That evening, he returned to Arok's wickiup with fresh game. He cleaned and prepared it in silence, glancing at Veska only briefly. "Why doesn't he have a wife?" Veska finally asked Zia. His woman died, Zia said, hands never pausing. White man's sickness, 2 winters ago. He grieved long time. Too long, some say. And now? Veska asked softly. Zia looked at her. Now he sees you. Thinks maybe spirits send you for reason. I'm not, Veska said quickly. I can't replace anyone. Zia met her eyes. No one said replacement. Zia's voice cut clean through the night. Apache no deny death, no deny loss. But heart keeps going. Life keeps moving. That night, Veska Rowe lay awake, turning those words over in her mind. She thought of Kenrick Stonehalt's body crumpled in the dust, of Althea Windrow's screams, of children torn from everything they had ever known. By comparison, her own losses felt smaller. A loveless father, men who never chose her, a life hollowed out by neglect. At least she had chosen to leave. These people had not been given that choice. Violence had ripped it from them. Days slipped into routine. Veska learned enough Apache words to survive. She discovered that Rak was not the only one who spoke some English. Trade and war had made shared language useful. She also learned that not all captives lived the same fate. Some were clearly slaves, worked hard, watched closely. Others, especially children, were folded into families that had lost their own. And then there was Veska, hovering in a strange, uncertain space she could not name. You could run, a whispered voice said one afternoon as they passed each other at the stream. It was Vea Lockridge, taken from another wagon. They don't watch you like the rest. Run where? Veska whispered back. We're days from anywhere. Better to die trying than live like this. But Veska wasn't sure she believed that. The life here was harsh, yes. But was it harsher than what she had fled? At least no one called her plain. Or worthless. No one tried to trade her to cover gambling debts. She worked, she ate, she slept. It was a kind of existence. One evening, Rak brought more than food. He set a small, carved wooden bird before her. Delicate, carefully shaped. He offered no explanation. For you, Zia translated, though it seemed unnecessary. Veska lifted it, her fingers tracing the smooth wood. Why? Rak spoke at length. Arak listened, then translated in fragments. He says you remind him of a caged bird he once saw in a white man's town. Beautiful, but sad. Wings, but no sky. He says here, you could learn to fly. I'm not beautiful, Veska said at once. Rak frowned and spoke sharply. Arak smiled faintly. He says you speak a lie, Arak said. Beauty is not face. It is spirit. It is courage. You have both. Heat crept into Veska's cheeks. She looked at Arhak. Really looked at him for the first time. Strong features, yes, but kind eyes. Hands capable of killing, yet gentle enough to carve something fragile and fine. A man who saw something in her that 23 years among her own people never had. I don't understand, she whispered. No, Zia agreed softly. But understanding comes. Maybe. That night, Veska lay clutching the wooden bird, staring up at unfamiliar stars. For the first time since the attack, she did not think about escape. Instead, she wondered what it might mean to learn how to fly. The thought frightened her more than captivity ever had. She woke to find her ankle wrapped in soft leather strips, padded with moss. The sharp pain from the previous day's fall had faded to a manageable ache. She hadn't heard anyone enter during the night. But the careful binding told its own story. Zia sat outside, grinding corn in the dim light before dawn. Rak fixed your foot, she said without looking up. He knows healing, learned from his mother. I didn't ask, Veska said. No, Zia replied calmly. You never ask. Too proud, or too afraid? Veska had no answer for that. She tested her weight carefully. The ankle held, supported, stable. The binding was expertly done. The camp stirred as the rising sun painted the eastern sky red. Veska had learned these rhythms now, women lighting fires, children darting between wiki-ups, men preparing for hunts or raids. But this morning felt different. There was tension in the air. Voices kept low. "The war party returns today," Zia said, reading Veska's confusion. "Many wounded. Much work." As the morning wore on, the truth arrived with them. Warriors limped into camp, some leaning on companions, others carried on rough stretchers. The raid had gone badly. Women rushed forward to tend them. Children watched with wide, frightened eyes. Veska helped where she could, carrying water, tearing cloth for bandages. Some glared at her pale skin, hostility burning in their stares. But the wounded needed care more than hatred needed release. She worked silently, trying to disappear into the labor. Then she saw him, Arheke, supporting another warrior whose leg was torn open by a deep, jagged gash. Blood seeped through the makeshift bandage, darkening the dust beneath their feet. Without pausing to think, Veska Rowe seized clean water and fresh cloth, following the wounded to where treatment was underway. An older woman, the band's primary healer, was overwhelmed. She barked sharp commands in Apache, hands flying, desperation plain in every movement. Veska didn't understand the words. She didn't need to. She dropped to her knees beside the injured warrior, pressing cloth hard against the flowing blood, while the healer turned to someone whose wounds were worse. Arheke worked at her side. His movements were quick, practiced, despite the exhaustion lining his face. Together they cleaned the gash, packed it with herbs Veska didn't recognize, then bound it tight. The wounded man groaned, but stayed conscious, his eyes flicking between his friend and the white woman helping keep him alive. Hours blurred together. Blood, pain, heat. Veska's dress was ruined, her hands stained dark, her back burned from bending over broken bodies. But she didn't stop. Couldn't. These people might have taken her captive, but they were also human beings in pain. When the last wound was finally wrapped and the dead prepared for burial, Veska found herself by the stream, scrubbing blood from her hands. They shook now that the urgency had passed. Shock settling in. "You did good." Rak's voice. Careful English. She looked up, startled. He rarely spoke to her directly, usually leaving words to Zaya. "People hurt," he said. "Enemy people." He sat beside her, not close enough to touch, but nearer than custom usually allowed. "You could not help," he went on. "No one make you. I couldn't just watch them suffer." He was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke again, mixing English with Apache, gestures filling the gaps. She understood enough. His sister had been the same, unable to witness pain without trying to ease it. Even after white soldiers killed their father, she had spoken against revenge, argued for healing instead of hatred. "What happened to her?" Veska asked quietly. "Sickness," he said. "White man spotted sickness." His voice roughened. "I could not save her. No healing strong enough." Smallpox. Veska knew its cruelty, its certainty. "I'm sorry." He studied her then, truly studied her. "You have same eyes," he said, "not color, inside, empty place where love should live." Her breath caught. No one had ever seen that in her before. No one had ever looked closely enough. "My father never loved me," she heard herself say. "No man ever thought I was worth choosing. I was used, traded, tolerated, never treasured." She didn't know why she told him. Maybe because he stood outside her world. Maybe because he had already seen the truth. Rick reached into a pouch at his belt and withdrew something small, a bead, turquoise, smooth and perfect, strung on a leather cord. He held it out. "What is it?" Veska whispered. "First gift," he said carefully. "Man gives woman. Means, I see you. You are worth seeing." Her hands trembled as she accepted it. Such a small thing. And yet, in 23 years, no man had ever given her anything that wasn't tied to obligation. This carried no debt, no expectation, only acknowledgement. "I don't understand your ways," she whispered. "I teach," he replied softly. "You learn. Maybe." He rose, offering his hand to help her stand. "Come, Zia waits." That evening the camp mourned its dead. Veska watched from a respectful distance. The grief was raw and unrestrained. These people howled their sorrow to the sky, unashamed of tears. So unlike the quiet funerals she'd known. Later, Zia explained what she had seen. The meaning of the rituals, beliefs about the spirit world, the importance of honoring both life and death. It was nothing like the Christianity Veska had grown up with. Yet something in it resonated. "Your God teaches shame," Zia observed. "Our spirits teach acceptance. Acceptance brings peace." Veska had no answer. She had never known peace, despite a lifetime of prayer. Days passed. Her ankle healed. She learned more Apache words, her understanding growing beyond what survival alone required. And without realizing it, something inside her began to shift. Rak began teaching her other things, how to recognize plants safe to eat, how to read the sky for weather before it arrived, how to move through brush without sound, how to set a simple snare without leaving signs behind. "Why are you teaching me this?" Veska Rowe asked one afternoon as he guided her hands, showing her how to anchor the wire. "You must know how to be strong," he said. "Not depend always on others." The idea unsettled her. Her whole life had been built on dependence, on her father, on men who might marry her, on the charity of wagon train families. No one had ever imagined teaching her how to stand on her own. But not everyone welcomed Rak's attention. Veska felt the looks, heard the sharp words she was beginning to understand. Some came from women who had lost husbands or sons to white soldiers. Others from warriors who believed her presence dishonored Apache pride. One evening, the tension finally broke. A warrior named Thar confronted Rak by the central fire, his voice loud enough for the whole camp to hear. Veska understood enough to grasp the accusation that Rak shamed his sister's memory by favoring a white woman. Rak answered calmly at first. Then, with rising heat, others joined in. Voices clashed. Sides formed. Veska shrank back, wishing she could vanish, knowing she stood at the heart of the conflict. Then Thar spat at her feet and said something that made several women gasp. Rak moved faster than sight. He struck Thar to the ground, and the two men collided in the dirt, fists and elbows flying. It took several warriors to tear them apart. When they were finally separated, both were bleeding. The chief spoke. Veska understood little, but Zia explained later. Rak had publicly claimed the right to court her, to protect her as his chosen woman. It was a declaration that altered everything. That night, Veska couldn't sleep. She turned the turquoise bead over and over in her fingers, trying to understand. A man had fought for her, not for labor, not for debt, not for exchange, but for her. The idea felt unreal. At dawn, she found Arak by the stream, washing dried blood from his face. His lip was split, one eye swollen shut. "You shouldn't have fought," she said. "Thar is wrong," he replied simply. "You are not enemy. You are Veska." The words broke something inside her. She dropped to her knees beside him, tears spilling for the first time since her capture. Years of being unwanted, overlooked, unchosen, pouring out in silent sobs. Rake did not touch her. That would have been improper. But he stayed. When her tears slowed, he spoke softly in Apache, then translated. Long ago, sky was empty. No stars. Moon was lonely, cried every night. Creator saw this and threw handfuls of light into the darkness. Now Moon has many companions, never alone. He paused. You were Moon. Now you have stars. Veska looked at him through swollen eyes. I don't know how to be loved. Then I teach this too. He stood and offered his hand. You are worth teaching. As she took his hand and let him pull her to her feet, something shifted in her chest. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it. The sun rose over the Apache camp, bathing everything in gold, and Veska, who had never known love, began to believe she might be worth loving after all. The first Apache word she truly understood was Ison, woman. But when Arjiki said it, pointing to her, it sounded different. In his voice, it carried respect, weight, something unnamed. She later sat beside 3 Apache women by the stream, learning to scrape hide. Her hands, soft from years indoors, bled quickly, but she did not complain. Complaints earned no respect here. Only work did. Hold knife this way, Kesh said gently. She was the youngest, widowed in the same raid that had brought Veska here. Too steep, you tear. Too shallow, hair stays. Veska adjusted her grip, mimicking Kesh's movements. The work was hard, repetitive, essential. Every hide meant warmth in winter. Trade for food. Nothing was wasted. You learn fast, another woman said. Not praise, acknowledgement. Days blurred into weeks. Veska learned the rhythm. Rise before dawn, tend fires, haul water, prepare food, scrape hides, weave baskets, gather plants. Always work. But unlike her old life, this labor had purpose. It sustained life, built belonging. Raki kept careful distance during the day, honoring custom. But in the evenings, he appeared at Arok's wickiup with small offerings, a rabbit, berries, once a handful of piñon nuts. He sat across the fire from her, teaching words through gestures and patience. Gocha, fire. To, water. Shison, woman. Then, softly, my woman. When Zia pretended to sleep, Veska's cheeks burned, but she repeated the words, tasting them. I'm not yours, she said in English. Not yet, Rak agreed, but maybe, if you choose. Choose, that word again. For the first time in her life, it meant something real. Women did not choose. They were chosen, assigned, traded, decided for. Yet here, Rak waited for Veska Rowe to choose, as if her will carried weight, as if she herself mattered. One morning, sharp shouts rippled along the edge of camp. Veska looked up from grinding corn to see children sprinting past, fingers pointing at riders approaching from the distance. She had learned the difference by now. These were not warriors returning from battle. They were scouts. The news spread quickly. White soldiers had been spotted 2 days' ride east, more than before, raising structures that looked permanent. A fort. The word settled over the camp like ash. Forts meant soldiers. Soldiers meant pressure. Pressure meant blood. That night, the men gathered in council. Veska couldn't follow the rapid Apache words, but she felt the strain in the air. Voices rose, some sharp with anger, calling for strikes before the soldiers advanced. Others urged retreat, distance, survival. Arak returned late. He sat beside her without speaking, staring into the dying fire. What will happen? She finally asked. Change, he said quietly. Always comes. We fight, we move, we die. Still it comes. He drew patterns in the dirt with a stick. Some say we trade you, other captives. Make peace with soldier chiefs. Her heart lurched, just when life had begun to feel, if not safe, then steady. Will they? Chief says no. You are protected, my protection. He met her eyes. But others are not happy. Say I put one white woman above the people. The words tasted bitter. Maybe they're right, he said. Her chest tightened. Maybe I should. No. His voice cut firm and final. I choose you. The days that followed were heavy. Veska felt eyes on her, heard muttered words she half understood. Some women who had softened toward her grew distant again. Only Kesh continued to teach her, though even she seemed burdened. It was while gathering roots with Zia that Veska finally broke. I'm causing trouble, she said, dropping plants into her basket. Rak is losing respect because of me. Maybe I should... Should what? Zia snapped. Run? Where you go, foolish girl? Her voice hardened. Back to people who did not want you? To soldiers who see a Apache woman and shoot first? Veska swallowed. I've never been worth this much trouble. Arak stopped walking and turned to face her. You think small, she said. Think like child. Rak sees woman, strong woman, works hard, learns fast, helps others. Worth fighting for. But I'm white, Veska said. I'll always be white. Skin is skin, Arak replied. Heart is what matters. Zia resumed walking. You know Rak's mother? Veska shook her head. Mexican woman, Zia said. Taken young, learned our ways, married Rak's father, became more Apache than many born to it, raised strong children, honored woman. She glanced at Veska. Skin not Apache, heart Apache, you understand? That evening, Veska watched Rak across the fire. He was repairing a bridle, his hands steady, patient with the leather. Every movement carried intention, no wasted motion, no clumsy fumbling. She thought of the men she had known, her father's drunken hands, Hask Ironfield's grasping touch, others whose gestures were nervous, uncertain. Rake's hands told a different story, of skill, of restraint, of strength used gently. Teach me something, she said suddenly. He looked up, surprised. What you want to learn? I don't know. Something Apache, something useful. He considered, then disappeared into his wiki-up. When he returned, he carried leather strips, sinew, beads, and tools. I teach you this. He held up a small leather pouch, decorated with simple beadwork. For medicine, for special things. Every Apache has one. They worked in silence. Rak guided her hands when needed. The awl was sharp, the work precise. Her first stitches were crooked, but he never corrected her harshly, only showed her again. My sister made many, he said quietly. Gave to children, to women who lost theirs. Said empty hands need something to hold. What was her name? Veska asked. Meyer, he said, means eternal blossom. His voice softened. She would like you. The words tightened her throat. To be compared to someone loved, she whispered. I'm not gentle, I'm just empty. No, he said. Not empty. Waiting. He touched the pouch in her hands. Seed in winter ground looks dead, but life waits inside. She followed his gaze. See? You already create. Empty people do not create. As dusk deepened, other women noticed their work. Kesh joined them, offering quiet advice on stitching. Soon, a small circle formed. Veska sat among them, hands aching, heart uncertain, but no longer alone. Women worked on their own pieces, hands busy while sharing the same firelight. For the first time, Veska Rowe did not feel like a captive surrounded by enemies, but like a woman seated among other women. When the medicine bag was finished, Uneven, simple, clearly her first. It looked humble beside the others. Rack examined it and gave a small nod. "First of many," he said. "You keep it. Put something special inside." Veska's fingers drifted to the turquoise bead resting at her throat. Special. She had never owned anything that could be called that. That night, sleep came slowly. The fort rising to the east meant danger. Change. Possibly death. The divide in the camp, over her, could still tear the band apart. Hawkeye's defense of her had cost him standing, maybe even safety. And yet, for the first time in her 23 years, someone believed she was worth defending, worth teaching, worth choosing. The medicine bag lay beside her, proof that her hands could make something of value. "Isan," she whispered into the dark, practicing the sound. "My woman." What would it mean to belong by choice, not by trade, not by obligation? To stay somewhere because she was wanted, not because she was useful. Outside, a coyote lifted its voice to the moon. The sound no longer frightened her. It was simply another creature calling to its own kind. Searching. Belonging. Veska touched the bag again, then carefully placed the turquoise bead inside. Her first special thing. Her first true choice. The leather was warm beneath her fingers, softened by fire and work. Tomorrow would bring trouble, the soldiers, the tension, the unknown. But tonight, she had this. Something made by her hands, a gift freely given, and the unfamiliar feeling of being worth the effort. It was not love. She still did not know what love felt like. But it was something. A seed buried deep in winter ground, waiting. The news came with a scout covered in dust, his horse slick with sweat from hard riding. Veska did not need to understand every word to grasp the urgency. Soldiers were coming. Not a patrol, a column. Moving straight toward them. The camp reacted at once. Women packed essentials. Men armed themselves. Horses were readied. Children, sensing fear, clung to their mothers. Veska was pulled into the motion, helping Arok bundle dried meat into medicine packs. "Where will we go?" she asked. "Mountains," Arok replied, never pausing. "Hidden valley. Soldiers not find." "Maybe." Rak appeared, his face already marked for war. The quiet teacher of evenings was gone, replaced by a warrior prepared to defend his people. He spoke rapidly to Arok, then turned to Veska. "You ride with grandmother. Stay close. If fighting starts—" "I know," she said. "Hide." She had learned that much, but Rak shook his head. "No. If soldiers come for you, go with them." "What?" The word broke from her. "They not harm white woman," he said. "You be safe." "I don't want—" But he was already gone, issuing orders, guiding the retreat. The band moved out under the high sun. Horses, travois, people on foot. Veska rode behind Zia on a steady mare, her few belongings, including the medicine bag, tied close. Around them stretched the practiced flight of a people who knew what it meant to be hunted. They had been moving for hours when gunfire cracked the air. The soldiers had closed the distance faster than expected. Warriors wheeled their horses, racing back to slow the pursuit while women and children pressed on. "Keep going!" someone shouted. Chaos followed. Horses reared. A travois overturned, spilling precious supplies. Children screamed, and through dust and panic, Veska saw blue uniforms crest a ridge. "There! White women!" a soldier shouted. Several broke formation, spurring directly towards the captives. Cold understanding settled in her chest. They had been followed. Someone had spoken of the wagon train massacre. And now the past had caught up with her. The taking of white women. This was no wandering patrol. It was a retrieval. A rescue, at least in their eyes. Raike came out of the dust as if the land itself had sent him. His horse slid into place between Veska Rowe and the advancing soldiers. His bow was drawn, arrow nocked, but he did not release. Other warriors formed beside him, a living wall. "Stand down!" a soldier shouted. The man's insignia marked him as an officer, Cale Vanthor, lieutenant. His voice carried authority and certainty. "We're here for the white captives. Release them, and we'll withdraw." Veska didn't need translation to understand the Apache answer. Refusal. These women were no longer prisoners. Some, like the Patterson children, had been taken into families. Others had found places in different ways. And she? What was she? "Ma'am," Coyle Vanthor called past the warriors. "Miss, we're here to rescue you. Come with us. You'll be safe." Safe. The word rang hollow. Safe from what? From people who had fed her, taught her, seen her worth? From Rak, who had chosen her? Safe to return to a world that had never wanted her? Before she could answer, Thar moved. He lunged forward, grabbing the reins of Veska's horse, wrenching her away from Zia. His words came sharp and furious. She understood enough. He was done risking Apache lives for white women. "Take her," he shouted in broken English at the soldiers. "Take all. We not die for them." The betrayal split the band. Some warriors agreed. Others rushed to stop him. In the confusion, soldiers surged forward. Arak's horse reared as he fought to reach her, but warriors, his own people, blocked him. "No," Veska shouted. "I don't want to go." Her voice vanished beneath the chaos. A soldier seized her reins. Others closed in, forming circles around the captives. She saw Vea Lockridge dragged onto a soldier's saddle, saw children torn from Apache women's arms, their screams cutting through the dust. "Please," Veska cried to the lieutenant. "I want to stay." Cale Vanthor looked at her with pity edged in disdain. "Ma'am, you're suffering from captivity trauma. Don't worry, you're safe now." "You don't understand." But Rak did. She saw it in his eyes as warriors restrained him, choosing the survival of their people over his heart. He fought them, calling her name, struggling like a man tearing himself apart. Too many hands held him back. The last thing Veska saw before they pulled her away was Arhak breaking free, only to be dragged down by his own cousins, not to harm him, to save him from charging armed soldiers alone. The ride to the fort dissolved into tears and protest. The soldiers treated her gently, like something fragile. They offered water, food, a jacket to cover her Apache dress. Their kindness felt like another kind of violence. "You're safe now," Cale Vanthor kept repeating. "The savages won't hurt you anymore." "They didn't hurt me," Veska said for the 10th time. "They taught me." "That's how it works," another soldier cut in. "Break white women down. Make them think they belong." "Give it a few weeks back in civilization," he added. "You'll forget all about it." Fort Defiance was smaller than she'd imagined, but sharp with military order. The recovered women were placed in the infirmary, examined by Dr. Isek Morrowan, who clucked over their condition. He noted Veska's darkened skin, rough hands, and Apache clothing with clinical judgment. "Classic signs of prolonged captivity," he told Cale Vanthor. "Physically sound, no extreme abuse." Veska wanted to scream. The real harm came now, as they stripped away her Apache dress, replaced it with coarse cotton, questioned her again and again, and refused to hear her truth. Vea Lockridge, in the neighboring bed, wept openly. "Thank God," she sobbed. "Thank God you found us. It was horrible, horrible." But Veska noticed how Vea clutched a small Apache doll beneath the blanket, noticed the careful beadwork she tried to hide on her moccasins. Not everyone was honest. Days dragged on in numb repetition. The fort commander, Mordex Greymar, summoned each woman for questioning. When Veska's turn came, she told the truth. About Rachak's kindness, about learning Apache ways, about wanting to return. His response was calm, patronizing. "You've experienced trauma," he said. "It's common for captives to develop attachments to their captors. It's a coping mechanism." "How long does it take to wear off?" she demanded. He smiled thinly. "Time." Veska clenched her fists. Time had never been on her side. "When will you understand that I know my own mind?" Veska Rowe demanded. "When you're thinking clearly again," Cale Vanthor replied, weary and firm. "Which you plainly are not. If you truly believe savage life is preferable to Christian civilization." The word savage struck her every time. Savage like Arok, who taught her the healing plants. Savage like Kesh, who shared her grief without judgment. Savage like Rak, who showed her she had value when no one else ever had. News drifted through the fort in fragments. The Apache band had scattered after the soldiers' attack. Some had fallen, others vanished deeper into the mountains. Veska pressed for names. None were given. Rak's fate remained unknown. "It's for the best," Reverend Okran told her gently. "Now you can return to your people. Begin again. Find a proper Christian husband." "I have no family," Veska said flatly, "and no Christian man ever wanted me." The machinery of rescue moved on without her consent. Plans were made to send the women east, to Albuquerque, where charitable societies would restore them. Veska felt herself being erased. The night before departure, she stood on the fort wall, staring toward the dark mountains. Somewhere beyond them, if he still lived, Rak might be looking back. Did he believe she had chosen to leave? Did he understand she had been taken, just as surely as she had been taken from the wagon train? "I'm sorry," she whispered into the wind. "Shatoy. No, that wasn't right. Hasty. No. My husband," she tried, but there had been no ceremony. What was the word for a man who showed her she was worth loving, even if she had never been given time to love him in return? Sael Vanthor found her there. "Miss Rowe, you should be resting. We travel tomorrow." "I don't want to go." He sighed. "I know it doesn't feel that way now. But in a few months, you'll be grateful. You'll have your life back." "What life?" She turned on him. "You know nothing about the life I left, or the one I found with them. I know you're a white woman who belongs with her own kind." "My own kind sold me for gambling debts," she snapped. "My own kind told me I was worthless. The only kindness I've ever known came from the people you call savages." Cale Vanthor shifted, uncomfortable. "I'm sorry for what you've endured, but just leave me alone." She turned back to the mountains. "You've already taken everything else." He left her there. Veska stayed until full darkness fell. Hidden in her pocket, missed by the soldiers' searches, was the medicine bag she had made. Inside it, the turquoise bead rested warm against the leather. Proof that once, briefly, someone had seen her as precious. Tomorrow she would be forced back into a world with no place for her. But tonight, she remembered. A warrior's patient hands guiding hers, an elder's calm instruction, a word, worthy, spoken to her for the first time in her life. "I have known love," she whispered, correcting the old truth. "Just once, just briefly." The stars offered no comfort, but she didn't need them to. Knowing was enough. Somewhere in the vast frontier, a man had fought to keep her, had seen her clearly, had offered her a different life. They could take her from the Apache, but they could never take the Apache from her heart. The attack came under a blood moon. 3 months after Veska's forced return to Fort Defiance, she remained housed with the other rescued women. Transport east had been delayed again and again by Apache raids on supply routes. The irony did not escape her. The very people she longed for were the reason she was still here. She woke to gunfire and war cries. The fort's bells clanged in alarm. Through her narrow window, she saw figures scaling the walls, overwhelming defenses that had stood for decades. This was not a raid for horses or supplies. This was something else. "Get to the chapel!" shouted Mrs. Hartley, the matron assigned to the women, pushing them toward supposed safety. Veska hesitated, heart hammering with impossible hope. The attack was precise, coordinated. Warriors struck multiple points at once. Some pinned soldiers with arrows, while others breached the inner grounds. She noticed something. They were not killing indiscriminately. This had purpose. Then she saw him, Rak, cutting through the courtyard, searching. Their eyes locked across the chaos, and the world narrowed to that single point. "Veska!" His voice tore through smoke and steel. She ran, not away from danger, into it, toward him. A soldier grabbed her arm, dragging her back toward cover, but she twisted free and ran straight into the fire. An arrow hissed past her ear. Veska Rowe didn't flinch. She ran straight on, breath tearing from her chest, until Rak reached her, caught her just as her legs nearly failed. "You came!" she gasped. "You came for me!" "Always," he said fiercely. "You are mine. I am yours." There was no time for more. Soldiers were regrouping, shouting orders, forming lines. Apache voices cut through the noise, sharp with urgency. They had to leave. Now. "Can you ride?" Rak asked. "Yes." He whistled once. A horse surged forward. Her horse, the same mare she'd ridden beside Zaya. Someone had kept her for her. The quiet thoughtfulness of it burned her eyes. "Stop her!" Cale Vanthor shouted. "She's being taken again!" "No!" Veska yelled back as she swung into the saddle. "I'm choosing!" Rak mounted behind her, his arm locking firm around her waist. Warriors surged around them, arrows flying, covering their escape. Gunfire cracked. Close. Too close. Rak jerked sharply, a harsh breath tearing from him. "Are you—" "Ride!" he ordered. They burst through the broken gate and into the open night. Riders flanked them, hooves pounding. In the moonlight, Veska recognized faces, Kesh among them, her jaw set with fierce resolve. They had come for others too, she realized. Not conquest, rescue. Miles slipped behind them before they slowed. Only then did Veska feel the warmth soaking through her back. Blood. Rak's blood. "You're hurt." "Not bad," he said, but strain edged his voice. They reached a narrow box canyon. Water, rock walls, cover. A place chosen long before tonight. Zia was already there with medicine bundles, as if she'd known. Her weathered face split into the first true smile Veska had ever seen. "Stubborn girl," Zia said. "Took you long enough to come home." Home. The word shattered something inside Veska. She helped Rak down. The bullet had carved a shallow furrow along his ribs. Painful, bleeding, but not fatal. "Let me," she said, reaching for the supplies. Her hands moved without hesitation, memory guiding them, cleaning, packing, binding. Zia's teachings lived in her fingers. Rak watched her, eyes soft despite the pain. "You kept the knowledge," he said. "I kept everything." She touched the medicine bag hidden beneath the fort's coarse clothing. "I never stopped being who you taught me to be." Others arrived, warriors reporting, families reuniting. Not all captives had chosen to come. Vea Lockridge had screamed for soldiers to protect her, but the Patterson children were there, clinging to their Apache mother, safe. Choice. It all came down to choice. As dawn crept in, They prepared to move deeper into the mountains. The fort would send pursuit, but the Apache knew paths soldiers couldn't follow. Still, the cost was clear. Hard days ahead, constant movement, scarce food. Always watching. "You understand," Rock said quietly as she helped him mount again. "This life, never easy. Always danger. Not what white women expect." "White women expect to be sold for debts," Veska said. "White women expect to be owned." She met his gaze. "I choose freedom. I choose you." He caught her hand. "At the fort," he said. "I thought you chose them. Thought you wanted their world." "Never," she said. "They took me. Just like before. Only this time I knew what I was losing." She squeezed his fingers. "I told them I wanted to stay. They said I didn't know my own mind." "You know," he said. "I know," she answered. "That's enough." They pushed on through the day. Veska rode close, steadying Rak when weakness hit. The wound wasn't deadly, but blood loss and strain weighed on him. That night, hidden in a deep valley, the truth settled over the camp. The raid had cost them. 3 warriors dead, several wounded, supplies lost in the haste of retreat, and the fort would answer. "War comes now," Vor said grimly. "No more small fights. They will hunt us." Arguments broke out. Some blamed Hack for insisting on bringing Veska back. Then Thar spoke. "She proved herself," he said gruffly. "Came by choice, took risk. Apache in heart, even if not in blood." Veska felt Rak's hand tighten around hers. She had chosen. And this time, no one could take that from her. It wasn't full acceptance, but it was movement in that direction. Veska Rowe spent the hours among the wounded, applying what Zia had drilled into her hands and memory. Every warrior she helped was one fewer voice raised against her staying. Pain had a way of silencing prejudice. Late that night, she sat beside Rak at a low fire. His fever had broken. The wound was clean, knitting slowly. Around them, the camp sank into an exhausted hush. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why risk everything to come for me?" For a long while, he said nothing. She thought he might not answer. Then, quietly, "You know the sickness that took my sister?" Veska nodded. "I was away with a war party when it came," he said. "Gone many days. When I returned, she was dying. She asked for water." He stared into the coals. "A small thing. Water. I had to go to the stream. Fill the container. Come back." His voice roughened. "She died while I walked, alone, asking for water I could not give fast enough." The fire cracked. Sparks lifted and vanished. "After that," he went on, "I asked myself what matters. What is worth fighting for? Pride? Land? Revenge?" He shook his head. "Nothing." He lifted his eyes to her. "Only this, being there, not letting go, not arriving too late." "So you came for me," she whispered. "I would always come." "You are not my sister," he said. Not her spirit returned. "You are Veska. Different pain, different strength, same truth." He reached for her hand. "Worth fighting for, worth dying for, worth living for." Her vision blurred. No one had ever named her worth like that. "I don't know how to love," she said. "No one ever taught me." "Then we learn together," he replied. "Apache way is patience. I wait. You learn. We find the path." She leaned carefully against his uninjured side. "What if the soldiers catch us?" she asked. "What if your people decide I'm too much trouble? What if the sun does not rise?" He interrupted gently. "What if eagles forget to fly?" He brushed her cheek with his thumb. "Cannot live in what if, only in what is." "What is?" she asked. "You are here," he said. "I am here. We breathe the same air, see the same stars. That is enough for tonight." She swallowed. Teach me how to say it. In Apache. I love you. He smiled, softening the refusal. Not yet. First, smaller words. He spoke slowly. Nai-go-san, you are my woman. Say it. She tried, mangling the sounds. He corrected her, patiently, again and again, until she came close. Good, he said. Now this one. Nailchita-shan. I will go with you. They practiced until her throat burned with unfamiliar shapes. Each word felt like a promise, bridging who she had been and who she was becoming. A coyote howled in the distance, that lonely sound she had heard on so many nights. Arak answered it. Soft, playful. The coyote replied. Suddenly it wasn't lonely at all. See, he said, everyone looks for the same thing. Connection, pack, belonging. She touched the medicine bag at her throat, felt the turquoise bead inside. Such a small thing to build a life on. But maybe lives were always built that way, on small mercies, a kind word, a patient lesson, a choice to see worth where others saw none. Tomorrow would bring pursuit, danger, an uncertain road with a hunted people. But tonight, she sat beneath familiar stars with a man who had bled for her freedom, learning the language of love in a tongue that had no word for worthless. Nigo-san, she whispered again. Right this time. Yes, he said. Always yes. The fire burned low. Neither of them fed it. Sometimes darkness made truth easier. Sometimes love needed shadow to grow strong before facing the light. And there, in that shadow, Veska, who had never known love, began to understand its shape. Not in grand gestures or pretty promises, but in patience, in teaching, in the simple act of coming back for someone when the whole world said to let them go. It was enough. More than enough. It became everything. The seasons turned, and with them, Veska Rowe's understanding of what home truly meant. 6 moons had passed since Raki brought her back from the fort. 6 moons of flight, concealment, and endurance. But also 6 moons of belonging in ways she had never believed possible. The band rested for a time in a hidden canyon, far from the reach of soldier patrols. Veska knelt at the stream, washing clothes beside Kesh and Mwim-Ravelin. Her hands, once pale and unused, were now sun-browned, scarred, and sure. Apache words slipped easily between the women, flowing like water over stone. Soldiers were seen 3 days south, Kesh said quietly. Scouts say they still search. They always search, NYM replied. But mountains keep secrets better than white men know how to find them. Veska wrung out a child's shirt, remembering how strange this labor had once felt. Now it was simply life, the steady rhythm of survival that bound them all together. Season after season she had proven herself. No longer a rescued captive, but a woman who carried her share. Veska! A child's voice rang out. Little Ik, whose name meant bear, ran toward her, clutching something bright. Look what I found! An arrowhead, perfectly shaped. Veska examined it with careful respect. Very good. You have sharp eyes. The boy beamed and darted away. A year ago, children had hidden from her. Now she was simply another aunt, another teacher, another shield in their small, fragile world. He likes you, Kesh observed. All children do. You would make a good mother. The word stirred something unexpected in Veska's chest. Mother. It was a future she had never dared imagine. Not in her old life where she had been unwanted, not even here where each day balanced on uncertainty. That evening, Aurek returned from the hunt with fresh deer. Veska helped with the butchering, their movements seamless after months of shared work. No words were needed. She knew when he would reach for the knife. He knew when she would need the scraper. Later, by their fire, he spoke. Soldiers are building another fort. Closer. Soon we move again. Where? She asked. West. Maybe south. VR speaks with other bands. Together we are stronger. She heard what he did not say. New bands meant new judgments. Not all Apache accepted white women. Some would never understand one who chose to stay. Are you afraid? She asked. Fear is sometimes wise, he said. It keeps us careful. He studied her face in the firelight. You fear? Yes, she admitted. But not soldiers. Not new bands. I fear losing this. Losing you. Waking and finding it was all a dream. Not a dream. He took her hand, tracing the calluses earned by work and survival. See? Real. You are real. He pressed her palm to his chest. We are real. That night, Vor called council. Veska sat among the women, but her place had shifted. She understood the words now. Followed the arguments. The news was grim. Soldiers pressed from the east. Mexican forces threatened from the south. Other tribes, driven from their lands, competed for the same scarce water and game. We cannot fight all enemies, Vor said. We must choose survival. Some argued for negotiation with the Americans. Others demanded alliance with bands still at war. Rechak spoke for retreat, into terrain too harsh for soldiers to follow. Then Thar stood. Veska tensed. He had accepted her, but rarely defended her. There is another path, he said. Some whites speak for us. Say soldiers are wrong to hunt us, wrong to kill us. His gaze shifted, deliberate, to Veska. Perhaps one who has lived both worlds could speak, could tell a truth they might hear. The council erupted. Send Veska as envoy. Trust white words carried by a white woman. As she listened, Veska heard more than doubt. Beneath it lay exhaustion. A people worn thin by running, by loss, by endless flight. And for the first time since she had chosen this life, she understood that belonging also meant responsibility, and that the next choice might demand more of her than survival alone. If there is even a chance, I will go, Veska Rowe heard herself say. If the council wishes, if Rock agrees. The debate burned deep into the night, voices rising and falling with fear and hope tangled together. At dawn, a decision finally settled like dust after a storm. Veska would go, escorted by Hak and 2 warriors, to the nearest town. They would seek out sympathetic ears, argue for the band's right to exist without endless pursuit. Willow Springs lay 2 days' ride away, across country no one traveled without risk. Veska dressed with care. Her Apache clothing was hidden beneath a traded white woman's cloak. A bonnet shadowed her sun-darkened skin. She looked exactly as she felt, caught between 2 worlds, fully belonging to neither. They camped the first night in a stand of cottonwoods. Arhak was quiet, tension etched into every movement. This journey cut against instinct, walking into an enemy's den, trusting words where strength had always been the shield. You don't have to come, Veska said softly. I could go alone. No. His answer was instant. Where you go, I go, always. Even into a town full of people who want you dead? Especially there. He brushed her cheek. You think I let you face wolves alone? By the next afternoon, Willow Springs rose ahead of them. The plan was simple. Veska would enter alone, find Judge Kryn Ashfell, known, at least by rumor, to have some sympathy for native claims. The warriors would wait beyond sight, ready to vanish if danger flared. Plans rarely survived first steps. Veska had barely reached the main street when a voice called out. Her white name, sharp with disbelief. Clara Brennan. By God, it's you. She turned and saw Hask Ironfield, the man her father once tried to sell her to. He looked prosperous now, his store busy, his coat fine. His gaze swept over her, Apache beadwork at her throat, the strength in her stance, hands ready to bolt. "We thought you were dead," he said, moving closer. "Your father drank himself into the grave last winter, crying about losing you to savages." Her father was dead. Veska searched herself for feeling and found none. That life was too far behind her now. "I need to speak with Judge Kryn Ashfell," she said. "It's urgent." "Judge Harrison?" Hask scoffed. "Clara, look at you. You've gone native." She lifted her chin. "I have, and I speak for my people." His face twisted. Shock, disgust, then anger. "Your people? Those murdering savages? You're still sick from what they did to you? Come with me. We'll get you proper care." "No." She stepped back. "I'm not a captive. I chose. His voice rose. "No decent white woman chooses Indians. You're confused. Someone has to take responsibility for you." He grabbed for her arm. Veska moved without thought, training taking over. She slipped his grasp and drew the knife at her belt. Hask stumbled back, shouting, "Indian lover! She's armed! Stop her!" Doors flew open. Faces appeared. Hands reached for weapons. Someone yelled for Tor Kevin. It unraveled in seconds. Veska ran. Shouts chased her through narrow alleys. Apache instincts kept her moving, but this wasn't open land. Streets ended abruptly, corners closed fast, windows filled with watching eyes. She was about to be trapped. A hand seized her and yanked her into shadow. Ray K. He was there with the others, horses ready, plan already broken but action swift. "Go," one warrior hissed. They mounted and burst into the street. Gunshots cracked behind them as they thundered past the town's edge, dust swallowing failed hopes. Veska bent low over her horse's neck, Rack riding hard at her side. They didn't slow until night swallowed the land. At a hidden spring, they watered the horses, breathing hard. No one followed. Willow Springs had no appetite for chasing Apache riders into the dark. "I'm sorry," Veska gasped. "I ruined everything." "No," Rack said firmly. "The town ruined itself. They see only what they want to see." The mission was lost, but she was alive, and she was not alone. Apache or white, no middle ground. And the other warriors were far less forgiving. In their eyes, she had put them all at risk with a foolish belief that words could mend what blood and history had shattered. The ride back to the band was quiet, heavy with disappointment and unspoken blame. Yet when they reached camp, the chief's reaction caught her off guard. "You tried," Vor said calmly. "It takes courage to walk into an enemy place carrying only words. This is not your failure." That night, as the band prepared to move once more, Veska Rowe sat alone at the edge of camp. The stars, once strange and distant, now felt familiar, steady companions in the dark. Zia found her there and lowered herself beside her. "You mourn?" the old woman asked. "I thought I could help," Veska admitted. "I thought I could be a bridge. But there is no bridge. They will always see Apache as savages. They will always see me as a traitor." "Maybe," Zia said softly. "Maybe not. A bridge is not built in one day. It takes many stones, many hands." She tapped the ground gently. "You were one stone today. You fell, but the stone was still placed." Veska absorbed those words as Rack emerged from the darkness, carrying something folded in his arms. A blanket. Not just any blanket, but one woven with the pattern that marked a married woman. Veska's breath caught. Rack stopped in front of her. "The chief says we leave tonight," he said. "We travel far. Find a new place." He hesitated. "It will be hard. Harder alone." she understood at once. This was the Apache way of asking. Not a moment's promise, not protection for a season, but marriage. A binding to this life, this people, this man who had shown her what love truly was. Her mind flashed to Willow Springs, to Hask Ironfield's disgust, to a world that would never accept her choice. Then she remembered Rak bleeding to bring her home, Arak's patient teachings, the children who called her aunt and meant it. "I will go with you," she said steadily. Rak wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, marking her as his wife before the band. Such a simple act. Yet it carried everything: belonging, acceptance, love that demanded nothing but her presence. "My Veska," he said in Apache. Then in English, quietly but firmly, "My wife, my choice." "My husband," she answered in both languages. "My home, my heart." At dawn, the band moved as promised. Veska rode beside Rak, wearing her marriage blanket despite the rising heat. Behind them, Willow Springs would spin its stories. The white woman gone savage, the traitor who chose Apache ways. Let them talk. She had found something worth more than their approval. A love that saw her clearly. A people who judged her by her deeds, not her skin. A life built on choice, not exchange. The sun lifted over the desert, painting the land in gold and possibility. Veska touched the medicine bag at her throat, feeling the turquoise bead inside, the first small thing that had changed everything. "So small," she murmured, "to build a life upon." "So strong," Rak replied. "Where do we go?" she asked as they rode. "Forward," he said simply. "Always forward. Together." She smiled, adjusting the blanket, feeling the weight and warmth of belonging. Once she had cried to the stars that she had never known love. Now she rode into the unknown with a heart so full it threatened to break. Love did not look like she had imagined in her father's cold house. It looked like patience, like teaching, like standing against impossible odds. It looked like choosing each other when the whole world said no. And as the Apache band vanished into the vast frontier, Veska Rowe finally understood. She had not lost herself by choosing this life. She had found herself, the woman who had always been there, buried beneath rejection and emptiness, waiting to be seen. Arak had given her his love, as promised. But more than that, he had taught her she was worthy of it. The desert closed around them, guarding their secret, honoring their choice. And Veska rode on, no longer the woman who had never known love, but the woman who had chosen it above all else. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. We appreciate you more than you think. If this tale stirred something deep inside, we invite you to remain part of this frontier of memories. More true stories of honor, compassion, and destiny are waiting for you here. Subscribe, share, comment, and thank you for riding with us today. Aviso legal. Disclaimer. Our content is designed for artistic and entertainment purposes and may reinterpret historical themes using fictional touches. We apply AI tools thoughtfully, only to support production, while keeping human supervision over editing, emotional tone, and narrative coherence. We always comply with regulatory guidelines for AI-based media and avoid deepfake practices or identity manipulation. All supporting components remain legally sourced. Please ask for authorization before sharing or adapting any segment. Your respect makes it possible for us to continue telling meaningful stories.